Let me tell you something that'll make you question every act of kindness you've ever received. There's a reason why the nicest person in your office, your family, your friend group always seems to attract the worst people. It's not coincidence, it's not bad luck, it's selection. Predatory, calculated, clinical selection. And if you're the kind of person who holds doors open, who apologizes when someone bumps into you, who gives people third and fourth chances, you need to understand something right now. You're not just kind, you're marked. You're walking around with an invisible sign that only certain people can read, and it says, "I won't fight back." Manipulators don't choose kind people despite their goodness. They choose them because of it. Here's what they never tell you in those feel-good therapy sessions about boundaries and self-care. A study from the University of Western Sydney found that people high in agreeableness, one of the big 5 personality traits, are significantly more likely to fall victim to manipulation and exploitation. But here's the twist that makes it so beautifully horrific. These aren't weak people. They're not naive. They're not stupid. They're people whose empathy has been weaponized against them. Clinical psychologist Dr. George Simon spent decades studying manipulative personalities, and he discovered something that should chill you to your core. Manipulators don't look for weakness. They look for conscience. They look for people who feel responsible for others' emotions, who can't stand watching someone suffer, who would rather hurt themselves than hurt someone else. Does that sound familiar? Because if it does, you've already lost half the battle. The predator's eye is trained differently than yours. When you meet someone new, you're looking for connection, for shared interests, for potential friendship or love. When a manipulator meets someone new, they're conducting an assessment. They're testing. A manipulator will manufacture small scenarios in the first few interactions that reveal your tolerance for boundary violations. They'll arrive late and watch how you react. They'll tell a small lie and see if you call it out. They'll make an inappropriate joke and measure your discomfort against your unwillingness to create conflict. Every smile you force, every uncomfortable laugh, every time you say, "it's fine" when it's not, you're feeding them data. You're teaching them exactly how much they can take from you. There's a forensic term called victim selection markers, usually applied to violent crime, but it translates perfectly to psychological predation. The markers aren't what you think. It's not about physical appearance or obvious vulnerability, it's about response patterns. Researcher Bettina Book studied psychopathic predators and found they could identify vulnerable targets just by watching them walk. Not because of weakness in the gait, but because of something more subtle, something in the body language that telegraphed non-confrontational behavior. Kind people move through the world differently. They make themselves smaller, they yield space. They signal availability and openness. And predators read these signals like you read text messages. But here's where it gets really sick. Manipulators aren't just attracted to kindness, they need it. Clinical studies on narcissistic personality disorder reveal something fascinating and horrible. Narcissists require what's called narcissistic supply, emotional fuel from others, to maintain their inflated self-image. And you know who provides the highest quality supply? People with high empathy. People who genuinely care. People who will absorb the narcissist's shame, doubt their own reality, and blame themselves when things go wrong. Your kindness isn't just convenient for them, it's sustenance. You're not a victim, you're a resource. And they will drain you efficiently, methodically, without ever showing you the contempt they actually feel. The selection process follows a pattern so consistent, it's been mapped by researchers studying coercive control. First comes the interview phase, disguised as charm. They'll seem fascinated by you, they'll mirror your values, they'll share manufactured vulnerabilities that make you feel trusted and special. This isn't connection, it's reconnaissance. They're building a psychological profile, identifying your core wounds, your deepest fears, your most cherished values. Then comes the testing phase. Small boundary violations that escalate so gradually you don't notice you're being boiled alive. A canceled plan here, a slight criticism there, a moment where they make you feel crazy for being upset. Each time you forgive, each time you make excuses for them, each time you prioritize their feelings over your own discomfort, you're confirming what they already suspected. You're perfect. You won't leave. And here's the thing that'll keep you up tonight. You think you're choosing kindness. You think you're being the bigger person, taking the high road, practicing compassion. But what if I told you that manipulators count on that narrative? What if your kindness isn't a choice at all, but a conditioned response they've learned to trigger like Pavlov's dogs? Dr. Martha Stout, who wrote The Sociopath Next Door, estimates that roughly 4% of the population has no conscience whatsoever. That's 1 in 25 people. Do the math in your social circle. One of them is sitting at your dinner table, attending your meetings, liking your posts, and they genuinely do not care if you suffer. They just care if you're useful. And the kinder you are, the more useful you become. But this pattern, this predatory selection of empathetic targets, it didn't stay confined to clinical case studies. Next time you instinctively apologize for something that wasn't your fault, remember what you just learned. That reflex, that immediate self-blame, that's exactly what they're hunting for. And somewhere, someone is watching. Now let me show you how they break you, because selection is just the beginning. Once a manipulator has identified you as high-yield emotional supply, once they've confirmed you're the type who will sacrifice your own well-being to avoid conflict, the real work begins, and it's work in the most technical and methodical sense. There are actual techniques, studied and documented in forensic psychology, that manipulators use to transform your greatest strength into your most crippling weakness. Your empathy becomes a prison, and they are the architect, the warden, and the only one with the key. The primary weapon is something called intermittent reinforcement, and it's the same psychological mechanism that makes slot machines addictive, BF. Skinner discovered it accidentally in the 1950s, when his pellet dispenser broke and started rewarding rats, randomly instead of consistently. Those rats became obsessed, pulling the lever compulsively, unable to stop even when the rewards nearly disappeared. Now apply that to human relationships. A manipulator who was charming and attentive during the selection phase suddenly becomes unpredictable. Some days, they're the person you fell for, warm and present and making you feel seen. Other days, they're cold, distant, critical, and you have no idea what changed. But here's the poison. You don't blame them. You blame yourself. You think, if you could just figure out the pattern, if you could just be better, you get the good version back. You're that rat pressing the lever, and your kindness is what keeps you trapped in the cage. Then there's gaslighting, a term so overused it's lost its clinical horror. The word comes from a 1944 film where a husband systematically manipulates his wife into questioning her own sanity. But the real-world application is far more subtle and more devastating. A manipulator doesn't tell you you're crazy. They create an environment where you can't trust your own perception of events. They'll deny saying things you clearly remember. They'll reframe your reasonable reactions as overreaction. They'll show you affection in private and indifference in public, then act confused when you're hurt. Researchers at the University of Nottingham found that victims of sustained gaslighting show similar brain patterns to those with early-stage dementia, literal neurological changes in the regions associated with memory and self-perception. Your brain is physically restructuring itself to accommodate their version of reality. And the kinder you are, the more willing you are to doubt yourself instead of them. But let's talk about the technique that specifically targets your goodness, the one that turns your empathy into a knife and hands it to them so you'll stab yourself. It's called playing the victim, and it's so effective because it hijacks your natural caregiving instinct. Every time you try to establish a boundary, every time you express hurt or frustration, the manipulator flips the script. Suddenly, they're the wounded party. You're being cruel, insensitive, abandoning them in their time of need. Dr. Craig Malkin, a clinical psychologist specializing in narcissism, documented how this reversal is often accompanied by what he calls strategic fragility. The manipulator will manufacture emotional breakdowns at precisely the moment you're about to leave or confront them. They'll cry, they'll threaten self-harm, they'll collapse into helplessness, and your kind heart, your beautiful, damaged kind heart, can't let someone suffer. So you stay, you apologize, you comfort the person who's destroying you, you become their therapist, their parent, their savior, and they become the black hole at the center of your life. There's a clinical term for what happens to you during this process, something called betrayal bonding, or trauma bonding. Whoa, tits. It was first identified in studies of hostages who developed emotional attachments to their captors, but it applies perfectly to manipulative relationships. The bond isn't formed despite the abuse, it's formed because of it. Dr. Patrick Carnes researched this phenomenon and found that the cycle of tension, explosion, and reconciliation creates neurochemical changes in the victim's brain. During the good phases, you get hits of dopamine and oxytocin, the bonding chemicals. During the bad phases, you're flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. Your nervous system becomes addicted to the cycle itself. The intensity of the lows makes the highs feel transcendent. Normal, healthy relationships start to feel boring by comparison. And here's the really sick part. The kinder and more empathetic you are, the stronger the bond becomes because you're constantly trying to rescue the relationship, constantly invested in fixing what's broken. You're bonded not to a person, but to the fantasy of who they could be if you just loved them enough. Manipulators also exploit something psychologists call the sunk cost fallacy. The more you've invested in something, the harder it is to walk away, even when walking away is the rational choice. They know this, so they make sure you invest everything. Your time, your energy, your money, your reputation, your sense of self. They isolate you from friends who might see what's happening. They create situations where you're financially dependent. They get you to defend them to others, so leaving would mean admitting you were wrong. Every defense you make of them to skeptical friends is another chain. Every time you explain away their behavior, you're not convincing them. You're convincing yourself that leaving would mean all that suffering was for nothing. And kind people, people who see the best in others, who believe in second chances, who think love can heal anything, they're the easiest to trap this way. Your optimism is the lock. There's documented evidence from cult deprogramming research that shows how manipulative systems specifically target people with high empathy and strong moral codes. Margaret Singer, who studied thought reform techniques, found that it's not the weak-minded who fall into cults. It's idealists. It's people who want to make the world better, who are willing to sacrifice for a greater good. Manipulators, whether they're cult leaders or your romantic partner or your boss, they speak the language of purpose and meaning. They make you feel like you're part of something important, like your suffering has meaning. like enduring their abuse is somehow noble, proof of your loyalty, your strength, your capacity for unconditional love. And you, with your kind heart, you believe them. You wear your wounds like badges of honor, proof that you're not shallow, not selfish, not like everyone else who gave up too easily. But here's what's happening in your body while your mind is rationalizing. Chronic stress from manipulative relationships causes measurable damage. Elevated cortisol levels, disrupted sleep patterns, compromised immune function, increased inflammation. Your body is keeping score even when your mind is making excuses. Studies on long-term emotional abuse show victims develop complex PTSD, the same diagnosis given to prisoners of war and survivors of prolonged captivity. Your kindness didn't protect you, it made you a better hostage. This cycle, this systematic destruction disguised as love, it doesn't end when you finally leave. Because next time you feel your boundaries wavering, next time someone's sob story makes you want to give them one more chance, remember this. Your compassion is real, but so is their calculation. Here's the part that'll haunt you. You left. You finally recognized the pattern, gathered whatever strength remained, and walked away from the manipulator who was draining your soul. You blocked their number, deleted their messages, told your friends you were done. And then, 3 weeks later, maybe 3 months, maybe 3 years, you went back. Or you found someone almost identical and fell into the exact same trap with a different face. This isn't weakness, this is programming. And understanding why victims return is understanding the most disturbing truth about human psychology. We're not wired to escape what hurts us. We're wired to make sense of it. Dr. Lenore Walker studied this phenomenon in domestic violence survivors and identified what she called the cycle of abuse. But it applies to all forms of manipulation. The cycle has 3 phases: tension building, explosion, and honeymoon. But here's what most people miss. The honeymoon phase isn't just relief, it's regression to the beginning, to that initial selection phase when the manipulator was everything you'd ever wanted. When you leave, you're not just leaving the abuse, you're leaving the memory of that perfect person, the one who understood you like no one else ever had. That person was never real. They were a disguise, a lure, a carefully constructed fiction. But your brain doesn't know that. Your brain remembers the dopamine, the connection, the feeling of being chosen. And when the manipulator comes back with apologies, with promises, with that exact charm that hooked you initially, you're not falling for manipulation. You're chasing a drug your nervous system is addicted to. Research from Stockholm University on relationship addiction found that people who experience trauma bonding show withdrawal symptoms identical to substance addiction when the relationship ends: literal physical withdrawal, nausea, insomnia, intrusive thoughts, physical pain. Your body is screaming for the thing that's destroying you because it can't distinguish between intensity and intimacy, between chaos and connection. And manipulators know this. They know that the first few weeks after a breakup are when you're most vulnerable, when the withdrawal is strongest. So they wait. They give you just enough time to start doubting your decision, just enough time for your kind heart to start rewriting history, minimizing the bad, magnifying the good. Then they reappear with perfect timing, and you collapse back into the cycle, because going back feels like finally breathing after drowning. But there's something even more insidious happening. Every time you return, every time you give them another chance, you're not just reinforcing their behavior. You're teaching yourself that your boundaries are negotiable, that your pain is acceptable, that your perception of reality is unreliable. Clinical psychologist Dr. Alexandra Solomon calls this self-betrayal, and it's more damaging than the manipulator's betrayal, because at least their betrayal is external. Self-betrayal is internal destruction. It's looking at yourself in the mirror and not recognizing the person staring back. It's hearing your own voice make excuses you don't believe. It's feeling your body scream danger while your mind constructs elaborate justifications for staying. And kind people, people who pride themselves on understanding, on compassion, on not giving up on others, they're exceptionally skilled at self-betrayal. You've spent your whole life prioritizing others' needs over your own discomfort. This is just the terminal stage of that conditioning. There's a concept in hostage negotiation training called learned helplessness, discovered accidentally by psychologist Martin Seligman in experiments that would never pass ethics review today. He subjected dogs to inescapable electric shocks, then later gave them the opportunity to escape. They didn't even try. They'd learned that their actions didn't matter, that pain was inevitable, that resistance was futile. Now imagine that happening to a human being over months or years of manipulation. Every time you tried to set a boundary and they trampled it. Every time you expressed a need and they weaponized it against you. Every time you asked for change and got temporary improvement followed by worse behavior. You learned helplessness. You learned that escape is impossible. So even when the door is wide open, even when friends are begging you to leave, even when every rational part of your brain is screaming danger, you stay. Because leaving requires believing that your actions matter, that you have agency, that you deserve better. And they've systematically destroyed that belief. Now let me show you how to recognize the pattern before it destroys you completely. Because here's the thing about manipulators, they follow scripts. They might improvise the details, but the structure is always the same. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, who specializes in narcissistic abuse, identified what she calls red flags versus red banners. Red flags are subtle, debatable, things that could be explained away. Red banners are unmistakable patterns that scream danger if you're willing to see them. Here's the checklist your kind heart doesn't want to acknowledge. Do they love bomb you initially with intensity that feels almost too good to be true? That's not passion, that's predation. Do they isolate you from people who care about you while calling it wanting you all to themselves? That's not devotion, that's control. Do they punish you emotionally when you don't meet their needs while being conveniently unavailable when you need them? That's not complexity, that's exploitation. Do they accuse you of the exact behaviors they're exhibiting? That's called projection, and it's manipulation 101. But here's the test that reveals everything. Try setting a small, reasonable boundary. Not a dramatic ultimatum, just a simple request about your own needs or comfort. I need you to call when you're going to be late. I'd prefer if you didn't make jokes about my weight. I need some time with my friends without you. Then watch what happens. A healthy person might be surprised, might need clarification, might even be momentarily defensive, but ultimately they'll respect your boundary because they care about your well-being. A manipulator will do one of three things. They'll make you feel guilty for having the boundary in the first place. They'll agree in the moment, then consistently violate it while making excuses, or they'll turn it around and create a crisis that makes you comfort them instead of enforcing your own needs. That single test, that one boundary, it'll tell you everything you need to know, if you're brave enough to see the answer. And here's what nobody tells you about recovery. Leaving the manipulator isn't the hard part. The hard part is leaving behind the version of yourself that needed to believe their lies. And the hard part is accepting that your kindness, the thing you've always considered your greatest virtue, was weaponized against you. The hard part is learning to trust your instincts again when your instincts led you into that relationship in the first place. Trauma therapists who work with manipulation survivors report that the average recovery time is roughly 1 year for every 2 to 3 years of the relationship. And that's with therapy. Without it, some people never recover. They just find new manipulators to feed their trauma bond addiction, repeating the cycle with different actors until they can't remember who they were before the abuse started. But there's something you need to understand about your kindness. It's not the problem. The problem is that you were taught kindness without boundaries is virtue, when it's actually self-destruction. You were taught that understanding someone's trauma means accepting their abuse. You were taught that unconditional love means loving someone no matter how they treat you. These aren't kind philosophies, they're grooming philosophies. They're the exact beliefs manipulators need you to hold so they can consume you guilt-free. Real kindness, healthy kindness, includes being kind to yourself. It includes recognizing that some people don't deserve access to your empathy. It includes understanding that walking away from someone who hurts you isn't cruelty, it's survival. So next time you meet someone who seems too good to be true, who mirrors your values perfectly, who makes you feel more special than anyone ever has, remember what you learned here. Remember that selection, that interview phase, that testing of boundaries, and ask yourself, am I being seen or am I being studied? Am I being loved or am I being prepared? Because the difference between those things is the difference between connection and captivity. And your kind heart, that beautiful, dangerous, resilient heart, it deserves to know the difference before it's too late, if it's not already.